474 in the one body. Hilchos Isurei, Perek Yud Tes. 474 and that's it. So we're continuing about women at Kali, chapter 19. This one is 232. We're taking the theme about who a Kohen can and cannot marry. One of the things that a Kohen cannot marry is a Chalala. What is a Chalala exactly? Is a Chalala? What is a Chalala? As usual, who was born from a prohibited relationship regarding Kohen. Yesterday's Perek described a woman a Kohen can't marry. If a Kohen marries such a woman, the offspring, Perek is 474. Yeah. 474. That's it. Yeah. If a Kohen marries a woman, the offspring is a Chalal if it's a male, or a female is called a Chalala. For example, a Kohen marries a divorce, he's not allowed to do that. Child of that union is called a Chalal or a Chalala. Correct. We'll say that we'll talk about that later. Besides losing their kahuna, such a girl from that union, besides
cannot marry Itiko.
Exactly.
So and same thing with a boy, cannot marry Itiko.
No, the boy is not so simple. Similarly, a woman who's not allowed to marry a kohen, who has a relationship with a kohen, this challah, she becomes a challah. In other words, for example, a woman who's divorced, right? She cannot marry a kohen. If she has a relationship with a kohen, she becomes a chalala. So besides not being allowed to marry a kohen if she's divorced, she also can't marry a kohen for an additional reason of being a chalala. About kohen, the kohen himself who did transgress and marry a divorcee, he's not profane. So once the kohen divorces this woman who was previously divorced, if she passes away, he retains his kohuna and he can go back to do what a kohen has to do. This union that we said causes the woman to be profaned from kohuna to be a chalal, whether she had a relationship intentional or she was accidentally or she was forced. In the documentation, whether it's traditional fashion or non-traditional. If she had her bone, is chalal. Once with any kind of penetration, she becomes a chalal from kahuna. Provided the male was at least 9 years old, the girl is at least 3 years old. If he's younger than 9 or she's younger than 3, the relationship is of no consequence. So, Kohen ben the Kohen who's at least 9 years old or older, Shabbat Grusha, who had a relationship with a divorcee. Well, a Zaynab, born a woman who, for example, let's say she was a Zaynab because she once had a Goyish boyfriend. She's a Zaynab. A woman whoever had relations with somebody she may not marry. For example, a non-Jew. The Kohen Gadol Shabbat later, a Kohen Gadol who has relations with either of them, of course. Or Alman, or a Kohen Gadol who has relations with a widow. A Kohen Gadol cannot marry a widow. If he has relations with a widow even without marrying her, she becomes a Chalala. A Kohen Gadol also has to marry a virgin. If she's a Bu'ula, she's already had relations with somebody else in her history, even a kosher Jew. If he marries her and Bubala, he has relations with her, it's not enough that he just has relations with her. He has to marry her and have relations with her, and they become eternally Halal. These women, their status becomes as a Halal. That means they can not marry a Kohen. Even if before they couldn't marry a Kohen because they were disqualified for other reasons, they become disqualified in addition for this reason. What if, for example, a Kohen marries a divorcee and has a child? Whether this woman has a child to the Kohen who profaned her, or if she marries a different Kohen, the child is a chol. So if a divorcee, any
child that comes from her,
with a Kohen.
Oh, yeah. with the Kohen?
Yeah, sure.
Not only post being violated.
No, of course not. Yeah, after Kohen who marries a challah, then those children are challah.
Children of Kohen become challah,
not Yisrael.
The woman can't.
A Zoe chalala refers to a child of such a situation.
I'm sorry, what refers to it? Is what?
The chalala.
I think it's Pergalov.
Yeah.
That refers to the woman. No, halala refers to the woman.
Yeah. Who comes from such a situation or who engages in
the relation. The offspring is already. Okay. Now we're saying
we're shifting to offspring.
Yeah. So the child, besides the fact that a woman who may not, I'm sorry, I'm very totally wrong. The halacha is very clearly anyone who's born from a
right.
So yeah, sorry. So we're saying both cases. A woman who a kohen has relations with, who he's not allowed to marry, that woman becomes a chalala.
But none of her, but her children will only become halala if they're products from the kohen, from the act.
That's right. If
Correct.
this halala marries a Yisrael, her children aren't halala.
Correct. Now, if the father's a challah, it's another story. The woman, her children are not challah. So again, we held a ben if she has a child from this kohen, whether it's this kohen who profaned her, or whether so again, let's take another example. A widow. A widow can marry a kohen, but if a kohen gadol has a relationship with the widow, he profaned her. Now she's a challah. Now she cannot marry a kohen. Okay. Now this woman who may not marry a kohen because she's been profaned by the kohen gadol when he had relations with her, goes and marries a kohen. That child is a challah. So, or she produces a child with a kohen gadol, for example, or with another kohen. It's irrelevant. The fact is, she becomes a challah. They have a kohen. However, a kohen who gives kedusha to a woman who may not marry a kohen, but this hour is gashmir, and she gets widowed because he passes away, or even or divorces her. And again, it's only kedushin, but it's challah. Then she does not become a challah. He says if he marries her, even though there's no relations, this challah, she becomes a challah, she becomes profane. She calls the surah b'chassid because the halachic assumption, status, if you will, of a woman who has the surah, the final stage of marriage, is that it's easy to have relations, even though she currently is physically a basula, physically a virgin. Exactly. Now, Kohen gadol should also begin to say if a Kohen gadol marries a woman is not a virgin because she had an injury, or because she already was older than Kohen gadol has a mitzvah to marry a woman who's not just a virgin, but married a basula. She has to be between the ages of 12 and 12 and a half. And she's not. She's already older. Even though there's an isser, she's not a chol. Like we said in the previous halacha, he has to marry her and then have relationship. Again, the same thing as the kohen gadol has to marry a virgin if she had a relation with somebody else, and the kohen gadol may not marry her. If he has relations with her, he does not make it to a chol, as long as he doesn't marry her. That's a unique thing about a kohen gadol, where there's a case where in order to make her into a chalala, he has to marry her and then have a relationship. And what case is that? That's where she's prohibited to kohen gadol because she's not a married basula. Hey, kohen has relations with a prohibited relative, with the exception being a nida. Example, kohen has relations with the sister or with his aunt, the mother's sister. Any other lab which is equal to all Jews across the board. In other words, again, not because he's a kohen, because he's a Jew and she's a Jew. Also, it's a zayin that he makes it to a zayin question, as we said. So it's irrelevant if you're a kohen levi Yisrael. A kohen levi Yisrael has relations with his, let's say, mother's sister. That makes him a zayin. If the kohen has relations with her a second time, and now again, and she already became a zayin in the first relations, which means she cannot marry a kohen. They who make kohen after, or another kohen has relations with her afterwards. Nas chalal, that makes it to a chalala. Again, because he had relations with her. And the prohibition of being with her is because it's kahuna status, that she's a zaina is also to a kohen, whether to a levi or a yisrael. Also to a kohen, that makes it a chalala. Zam and a chalala, and then her children, that are also chalala. Therefore, kohen sheba'al is completely other. A kohen who has a relationship with a woman whose husband's died, childless. Now, we of course know that the child of that 474, that's it. We know that the woman whose husband died childless needs yibum chalitza, correct? She's waiting for the guy to decide, the surviving brother, if he wants to give him a chalitza. He can't make up his mind. Meanwhile, a kohen, she has a relation with somebody else who she's not supposed to. He's a kohen. And from that union, she becomes mubar. She was pregnant. Have all kosher. The child is kosher. The kosher kohen. Because this prohibition of a woman waiting for you to have you with somebody else is not Torah specific prohibition. It's every Jew across the board. But so therefore, it doesn't make her into a halala and the child is kohen. However, because she had a relation with somebody she may not be with as a Jew, now to say she becomes a zayin. However, if now she's with a kohen a second time, either this kohen or a different kohen, this she becomes pregnant, gives birth a second time, and this guy can't make up his mind for already 18 months if he's going to give you a chalitza. She becomes a chalala through the first union, and the child born 9 months later is a chalala. Because that prohibition is kohen specific.
So the chor of the first union is kohen, but
the chor, but he's a child. It's a kohen. Yeah. So here's an example where these two biological brothers have the same father, same mother. The older one is a kohen, the second one is a chalal. The older one, he gets malchus, he goes to the basic forest. The younger one, he goes to hate. Because the first child was born of a union that was not kohen specific. It was a Jewish problem. A woman waiting for you, may not be with another man, whether that other man is kohen Yisrael. that child therefore is, it's born out of a very union, but the child is kosher. It's not a mamzer. The issue is allowed. It's not a chorus. That child is a kosher Jew. The second brother, however, having that first child makes sure to a zayin. Now when she goes and has a second child with this kohen, that was a kohen specific prohibition because she became a zayin the first time. That child is a cholol. So two brothers, and one's a kohen, one's a cholol. But kohen has relations with a convert. Not allowed. You can't marry her, of course, or a freed slave. Chila, again, he makes sure to a cholol. Zayin and cholol, and her descendants are cholol. If the father was a regular Jew and the mother was a convert, child's a kosher yid. Both males and females, those gam per se. But if the father's a kohen who marries a convert, that's not allowed. Excuse me, even have relations with a convert, having married, that child is a cholol.
All generations.
Oh, we'll discuss in a second. So for males, yes. Kohen has relations with the nida. Havol kosher. I beg your pardon? Right. Havol kosher ve'eni chol. The child is considered kosher, like any Jew has relations with the nida. If the child's kosher, it's like a pagam, but it's not a milo, but it's not a soul per se. He's not a chol. He's not a chol. She'ein discerning the miyuchad l'kahanim. There's no thing about being a kohen that makes it more problematic than the nida. No Jew could be with a nida, so it's not a kohen specific prohibition. Allah shavakah is across the board. So again, in order to make the woman to a chol, the problem with the union has to be a kohen problem. If it's a Jewish problem, that's make it a chol. And being a man being a nida is a Jewish problem, not a kohen problem.
It's a big problem.
Yes, exactly. The Jewish problem. Zayin, kohen should also know better. As a kohen who, this is kind of obvious, but anyway, a kohen who marries a pregnant divorcee, and he's not allowed to do that. But she's already pregnant from a previous person. Whether it's from him. In other words, a kohen impregnated a woman, he was married to her. After she became pregnant, he divorced her, and then he married her. Or he married someone else to divorce her. But the point is,
they're not specifying who she became over from.
Exactly. Yeah. So either from him or from somebody else. He marries someone else's divorce. The point is, she is already pregnant before he marries her or remarries her. The older she chalola, and she gives birth after the kohen marries her when she has become a chalola. So this chalola is giving birth to a child, but that child
the day before she gave birth.
Let's say, for example, Havol kosher. This chalola can give birth to a kosher Jew. Why? The conception, she wasn't a chalola yet. Yes. We already said that
she didn't give birth to a kohen, even though she married a kohen after she was pregnant.
Let's say a kohen marries a woman and impregnates her, and then divorces her, remarries her, the child of the kohen. We already said that a chalutza is also to marry a kohen d'Rabbanan, since she resembles a divorcee. Therefore, a kohen has relations with a woman who got chalitza. She is a chalala, and her descendants from this kohen are also chalalim. Back home in Devayim, it's midrabanan. So they're chalalim midrabanan. A kohen has relations with another prohibition. That's a shniya, which means he is not allowed to marry such a person midrabanan. But again, it's across the board for all Jews. She is kosher, and so are the children, the descendants. She is shniya because the prohibition of shniya is Israel who it's across the board. It's not a kohen prohibition. That's Kohen Shabal Suffolk Zayna. Kohen has relations to Suffolk Zayna. For example, okay, Suffolk years from Shecheres, you have two children. One is a goy, one is a yid. We mix them up in the dark at night. Now we know what to do, so we convert them both. And one is a kosher born Jew, one is a ger, or one is a Evid, one is a Shecheres, and they're both Suffolk yid, Suffolk ger. Ger is a Zayna. Shabal Suffolk Yerusha has relations with a woman who, for example, is a Suffolk Yerusha. So she got to get from her husband who was a Suffolk, then he died. So now is she a widow or is she a divorcee? The same Kohen Gadol Shabal Suffolk Almana. Kohen Gadol has a Suffolk, a widow. A man gives a kedushin to her. It's a kedushin Suffolk, and it's doubtful status of the marriage. Then the guy dies. Now is she a widow or is she no connection to the guy? So he's a Suffolk Cholov. Again, the situation is this is Suffolk. If she's a Cholov, the Suffolk Cholov. Again, her children are also the same status of Suffolk. Yud. Turns out we have three possible types of Cholov. Cholam Atayda, biblical Cholov. Cholam Midivrei and Cholam Midarbanan. The Suffolk Cholov and the Suffolk. Suffolk Cholol nation of Chumei Kahanim Chumei Yisrael. And Suffolk Cholol, you give him both chumras, chumra v'koyin and chumra. He can't chumra. Maybe he's Yisrael. But the time of Mason, he can't go to the cemetery. Maybe he's koyin. The day see Isha really koyin, he has to marry a woman, or koyin can marry because it might be a koyin. If he does eat truma or becomes tamei, or he marries a divorcee, makas to give him makas d'Rabbanan. Who I didn't with the cholish the the same applies to chol d'Rabbanan. Give makas d'Rabbanan. He has also the same chumras. I'm sorry, no, the chol d'Rabbanan. Yes, sorry, the same the same chumras. Because now Torah is Yisrael, you can't eat truma. The Rabban is a cholos, therefore you can't marry a grusha. You can't do it. Have a cholos shall Torah havade. However, a definite cholo, right? A kohen marries a definite divorce. Harei hu kazar, he is a non-kohen. That child could marry a divorcee. But when Talmud should go to the cemetery, he has no kohen status. Remember, it says, "Emma kohen b'nei Aaron, tell the kohen the children of Aaron, afapi shehem b'nei Aaron, the b'nei Aaron, until they are in their kohen state." However, elsewhere the Rambam says, if such a child does the avodah of Mikdash, it's kosher. You know, kohen zacha shu also a kohen who's a male who is, and it's also it's a pasuk in the. It's actually Chumash also. I don't remember exactly. All right. Anyway, kohen zacha shu also this is in a chalala. It's a bracha of Yaakov, a bracha of Moshe, the Shvatim. All right. Anyway, kohen zacha shu also this is in a chalala. Kohen who's a male who cannot marry a zayin or a chalala. Also, because he's not allowed to marry a convert or a freed slave. She can say that she's like a zayna. As we said, Hennes, a bas kohen, right? Aaron Kohen's daughter. He had any daughters. She could marry a chalal or a ger mashukra. The female kosher Jews, the bas kohen, for example, is no prohibition to marry a disqualified male. It says, "Bnei Aaron, the children of Aaron, the sons, not the daughters." Turns out a male convert could marry a mamzeres if he wants to, because a ger could marry a mamzer. But Lisa Kohenes, he can also marry bas kohen. So a male ger can marry the entire spectrum. Sai can marry mamzeres. Sai can marry the daughter of Aaron Kohen. Good day. A ger or a freed slave that got married and had a daughter. Many generations down the line. Since there's no original Jewish seed that's mixed over here, in other words, this whole family is all gerim and all the descendants always only marry gerim and slaves. So that daughter cannot marry a kohen. And this is if she does, let's say she doesn't have to leave. She was born a Jew. The halacha is that even though there's no ancestry, that's a native born yid, she's allowed to stay married to the kohen. It says in the Gemara, this is a chumrah the Kahanim accept upon themselves to make their lineage more pristine after the churban bias. We said the previous prakim that if the ancestry is all gerim, the child is a male, so then we said that's also actually also not Torah for him to marry a kohen until it's not no longer public for that male. What do we say in previous talk about that? If the child's a male, then he's allowed to marry a mamzer. He's allowed to marry a mamzer. Her also probably as well, but female men, but males and females, that they can marry a mamzer as long as it's even if Jewish. No, sorry. Again, if two ger marry each other, so even if as long as it's public knowledge, this family's ancestry was started by two ger, they're cautious to marry a mamzer until it becomes non-public knowledge. All right, it was a previous pair. Go back to we'll revisit it at the time. So the bottom line is we said that we hear this girl should not marry a a ger or Eved who's free who marries a regular Jewish girl, or Yisrael or Yid who marries a female convert. Share the daughter could marry a kohen. It's one of the fathers is a natural born Yid. Yid Gimel ger a ger from Amrin who married a Jewish girl. And remember, the gerim of Amrin may not marry the Kal Hashem. And Mitzri similarly, and Mitzri, the second generation who married a Jewish girl, which is also not allowed because you have to be third generation. Even though that union is prohibited, and the wife becomes a zayna in that marriage because it's a prohibition across the board for all Yidden. The children are kosher for kahuna because it's not a prohibition, and it's not a problem to marry a Jew because even though the third generation ger mitzri is fine, and even though a ger of Amin may not marry the Kal Hashem, but the child of that union is not a problem to marry any Jew. And it's not a problem to marry a kohen. You doubt. It's not a problem to marry any Jew because it's not an issur in the lineage, just in the marriage. It's not a problem to marry a kohen because the problem with the union is not a kohen specific prohibition. Now, a male chol who married a regular Jewish girl. So a kohen marries a divorcee, not allowed, right? That child's a chol. Now, Mr. Now this Kohen, this child's last name is Cohen. Is not a Kohen. He's a Chol. Marries a woman. So her children are Cholim as well. The same Ben his sons, etc. As we said before, that's for all generations. The male descendants of Cholim are Cholim forever. Sheben Chol.
So really, a Kohen has to be careful who he's married. They have to have, the woman have to have a pedigree. They have
Oh,
to,
sure. We'll discuss that next halachas. Yeah. Sheben Chol is Zachor Cholim because a male Chol that continues forever. However, if they have a girl, she cannot marry a Kohen. She's a Chalala. She's a Chalala. She's not a Chalala. If a non-Kohen marries her, which is perfectly fine, then Havolta, that child's kosher. The
gets removed.
All right. So that guy, that Kohen have a grandchild. He's a Kohen, but the father's not a Kohen, right? So a Kohen marries a Gerusha, child's a Chol. A Chalala, sorry, a female Chalala. She marries Yisrael, child's fine. The child is a fine, so she's fine. So this Kohen's granddaughter can marry a Kohen, their child's a Kohen. Okay. Therefore,
They will stop for one generation.
2 generations. Yeah. If she was a daughter, she can marry as well. Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim, Mutam is a Kohen and Yisrael all can marry each other. The male determines the father's lineage. What's the next one? Yeramam, Levim or Shneimah?
Levim,
Yisraelim, the Chalalim. Mutar Mov is Ebezeh, the Levim, Yisrael, and Chalalim all marry each other. The child goes after them. The father is Yisrael, Levi or Chalal. That determines the child's status. Shemet says they establish a lineage based on the father's household. It says in Bamidbar, the base of who Mishnachli, the father's household is the family. They basically Mishnachli, not the mother's household. The mother is determined to be Jewish or not, but the status of which part of Chal Yisrael is the father. That's nine. Levim, Yisrael, and the Chalalim, beginning of Shecharim, a Levi, Yisrael, and the Chalal. Gadim and freed slaves, they all marry each other. If a male ger marries a kind of thing Yisrael, the child is a regular gift after the father. A regular Jew, not a Kohen, a Yisrael or a Levi, marries a convert, a woman who converted. Again, the father goes after the Zachar. So, yeah. So in other words, that means the child's not a Kohen or a Levi or Yisrael. He's a Ben Gayer. Well, he's Yisrael, but again, he doesn't have a shame. I'm sorry, forget. He goes after the father, but the father determines if he's a. So if a Levi marries a woman who converted, he's a Levi. Good. Good time. Call mishpachas of chesed shemes. All of the mishpachas among the Jewish people are chesed kashrus. Nowadays, you have a lot of phony conversions going on. The Pasuk talk about this, but in times of the Gemara, that all the mishpachas among Yisrael, the chazaka of the kasher, Jewish people marry the supposed to. They're married. They do getting properly. That's the assumption. With at least some you can marry any family you want. I'll begin nonetheless. And you find 2 families always fighting with each other. One family is always fighting with everybody else. Or you used to issue, but a person is always fighting with everybody.
It's talking about 2 different families, or it's talking about in general. If you find a family,
so both examples. One example is 2 mishpachas who fight with each other, or a mishpacha b'chal fights with everybody else.
No. The question wasn't that. The question was, is it talking about a family that happens to fight within itself when it says mishpachos, or it's talking about 2 families that continuously have intergenerational fights?
No, that's what it says. Shtei mishpachos. Shtei mishpachos goes with the family. 2 families fighting with each other.
Adopted with each other.
Yeah.
That's one.
Or you mishpacha or a family which is constantly fighting
within
with
itself.
No, b'chal involved.
Oh,
Yeah. Or isha or Isha who you find out one person, not a family, but he's by himself, but it's a person we always see. So everyone is very chutzpah, he's very, very brazen. Now we should be concerned with Barney. It's appropriate to distance yourself from them. These are simonim of disqualifying traits. Somebody who constantly disqualifies others.
To what?
Maybe there's a
in other words, the chazaka that we give the benefit of the doubt is removed.
Exactly. Because right,
fight.
Right, the person who always passes on people, and he calls his families or individuals and negative things. Very relationship. Mamzer calls him. He's a mamzer, right? He uses that term very common. Maybe he's a mamzer. He calls him avodim. Maybe he's an ever. You call a place or more place. Whoever pops someone else uses his own.
Is this where it was coined?
Huh?
This is where
no, it's a Gemara, I think, but yeah, right. Now we'll get to the Gemara. Someone who's always very brazen and cruel and hates other people, but ain't going to doesn't do kindness. Maybe some of the nation give like because they mix the Jewish people. maybe this one Yehoini guy got mixed in. Shemani Yisrael and Umar Kashiv, because what's the symbol of the Jewish holy nation? Hashem, they're meek and bashful. Rachmanim, they're merciful. Kabbalah do kindness. Regarding the Gebenim, it says, like the great Gebenim are not from the Jewish people. If Yishahezu Panem, they were very brazen. They weren't at peace. They didn't have mercy on Shaul's kids. But God Shaul Chesed, Malcolm did not do the kindness of forgiving them. We talk about the story, right? There was a famine during all times. And 505, yeah? There was a famine during all times. And they saw Buch HaKadosh that the reason why there's a famine is because the Gebenim had a Kaveda on Shaul HaMelech because he mistreated them for whatever reason, what it was. So David HaMelech said, how can we appease you? To take off the Kaveda. They said, give us 7 of Shaul's descendants and we'll kill them. That was the only way to do it. So David HaMelech, as the king, had the authority to do that. And they did that, but he said, therefore, they could never ever marry the Klal Yisrael, even if they don't make something Dutch. The Yidden were the ones who were conquering the Gebenim. They tricked the Yidden, and the Yidden let them live. Not only that, but when the Gebenim were attacked by other Canaan nations for making peace with the Yidden came to their aid. And still they didn't have a mercy, therefore David HaMelech said they don't belong to Israel. Yichas. Mishpacha should call the honor. Mishpacha, that there's been a concert, a protest. What does that mean? Two people testify. They have acres that from they heard two other their ancestors that a mamzer or cholol got or slave got mixed in his family. There's a suffix. It's not the family itself. Mishpachas Kahanim, the family Kahanim. Lisa Mena Isha. You shouldn't marry a woman from that family.
Where did you get that it's a family tradition and not that they're direct Aiden?
A good question. That's my suspicion. Because in Chayra, you could say that because of what? Because when you a Bedika with a great grandmother, how would you know that what's the point of you have 2 Aiden? How would 2 Aiden know that so many generations back that there was anything mixed in? That's why. We'll see soon. The Mishpachas Kahanim, if it is a Mishpach of Kahanim.
Same way the first Aiden. No.
What?
Is there such a Muslim that 2 Aiden could testify to 2 Aiden to 2 Aiden?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In other words, not necessarily embedded in terms of status of Aveira but over here. Mishpachas Kahanim, if you found it Kahanim, the Yisrael and Isha Yidikala Abba and Moshe and Shmona. Don't marry a woman from there unless you respect 4 maternal ancestors. Ima her mother, Be'im Ima her mother's mother, Be'im Abi Ima her mother's father's mother, Be'im Ima Abi Ima her mother's father's mother's mother. We should also respect her father's mother. Be'im Abi her father's mother's mother, Be'im Abi her father's mother, Be'im Abi her father's mother's mother. Yes.
For foreign genes?
Or to see what any of those members are
other offsprings are indicating the same problem.
Exactly, right. Yes, now that's if it's Kahanim, who are more and more specific about not marrying who they shouldn't. If they're not Kahanim, you basically you have to go back one more generation. So you have to also check her mother's father's mother's mother and her father's mother's mother. You can't track of 10 maternal ancestors. Because the Israelim is more problems than Kahanim, more mixed in things, problematic things. Why only respect the women? Because the men, if they fight each other, he will curse him by his tainted lineage. So become public. How women don't fight that way. Therefore, we wouldn't be public knowledge unless you investigate. Why should a man do an investigation? He wants to marry his family that's been cast out upon. But a woman who marries to a family doesn't have to do an inspection because the kosher women don't have a prohibition of marrying to the non-kosher males. That's regarding halal and akayim. Regarding mamzers, that's not the case. All these cases, let's finish the paper, we'll talk about it. So in other words, again, because we see that the Torah doesn't prohibit a kosher woman to marry a puzzle kanyan, even though a kosher woman can't marry a mamzer, but therefore the Chum didn't require it when it comes to this suffix over here. So they learned from that, didn't apply it over here. Call Shekari like mamzer v'shish. You can call a mamzer, he doesn't protest. Or nasim v'shish, you call him a nasim, and call him v'shish, you call him a chol, and it's quiet. Oh, yeah, v'shish, you're a eved. Chaysh, no, you mishpat, and you say, oh, why is he protesting? If you're worried about it, the aim in the hand of the king, and we don't marry them unless you do an inspection. Chav Gimel. Mishpacha, she's our last halacha. Mishpacha, she's our Mishpacha, that is Suffolk Hologamic name. Every widow cannot marry a kohen, even though no widow could marry a kohen. But over here they can't. This if you get married, when you take it off, get divorced, because you have two shakers. Maybe this widow is the cholol. Maybe she's maybe maybe this widow is married to the cholol beforehand. In which case she's the cholol as well. Maybe she's not. Even if she is the widow of the cholol, maybe that guy the cholol wasn't the cholol. It's a subject, right? However, if it's a definite cholol that mixed in, any woman cannot marry, any divorcee, can marry. Even a widow from that family cannot marry, the descendant cannot marry a claim with who the inspection. And this is if you get married, Kate, they must get divorced. Why do you use Same applies if it's a Suffolk Mammoth or a definite Mammoth gets in. Because the prohibition of marrying a Mamzer and the wife of a Cholol to the Kohen is the Echad of the power of this circle, as we explained in Perik Chaz Halacha.
Hurts us the name.
One second. Yeah, very true. It does. It's primary fucking sense. So that was your question. Like it says the ksheris are allowed to marry the ksheris, the kosher women to marry
I
possible.
wasn't know the kosher reading.
Kosher shot is that a kosher bas kohen could marry a soul if she wants to marry a cholol, she could.
Yeah. A bas kohen can marry a cholol.
Yeah.
With the awareness that the kids are going to be after the cholol. So it's not a Isurei problem.
Yeah, so therefore we're saying over here that if the woman wants to marry this family, she doesn't have to do inspection. She's the cholol, so what's the problem? Now, fine, what's the mamzer? She can't marry a mamzer. The shot is that the chum is required to make this investigation because we see that there's nickel by a kohen married to a cholol. Look at her.
No, I don't understand the Hava, why we should investigate, because these things do come up generations later, so it should be.